A Guy with AI is recorded on Indigenous land. Welcome, listeners, to an AI-less episode of A Guy with AI. I apologize if you don't like the audio quality right now. This is a recording done on my phone because I'm between installations in terms of my hardware. I had an audio interface more or less blow up on me. So that left me hunting for an affordable unit, which I found. But the truth of it is that I'm in the midst of quite a lot of setup and transition as far as my computing activities in general, trying to become a bit more professional with that, insofar as I have sole proprietorships currently in this regard, and I'm in a building phase. So what I did was, rather than working in one spot in my house, I'm working in an apartment rather. I'm working in another, and it's been a matter of that setup. So the image that you see associated with this episode, whether viewing on YouTube, welcome, or listening on the very many audio podcast platforms that the show is available on, A Guy with AI. You will note that there's a photo there if you have vision or access to such through your connection, and it will just show an image of where I intend to be working. Things on the screen will be a little different as we go along and so forth, but this is not computer or AI enabled this episode. I just thought, since without announcement, my gear blew up and then haven't been posting podcast episodes, I thought I'd just check in, assert my intention, definitely at the very least, to be podcasting again in more or less the format that you've been receiving it. It will be perhaps, I don't want to say things too early and promise, but with some technical developments that are sort of spurred ahead by this setback that I've had. This is something that may allow me to enable an interview format, for example, for the program, because I need to get a little deeper into how I have my audio set up and things like that to enable that. It's one of many things on a list. It's a sort of, a lot of the time, fairly hectic, invention-oriented environment with me in front of a computer, which has been frequent. I've been taking a bit of a step back as I've been going through this transition, moving my entire apartment around and things like that. And as we go on with my thoughts, we'll see how long I talk. I guess it's been about 3 minutes and 11 seconds so far. We'll see how long I talk, but this is basically the episode, what you're hearing. I'm going to get into what AI has to do with when AI isn't around, what AI has to do with maybe being an inspiration for an expansion of thought or investment in possibilities, let's say, while not being the be-all, end-all, and answer to every of life's problems. It will become pervasive as we use it. Like, for example, is a car the answer to all of life's problems? Well, as it turns out, as we progressed, it can be the cause of some of life's problems. Beyond auto accidents and so forth, we would have their polluting nature. So this would have to be weighed at a minimum. We would engage in that with any technology, I think, or any broad social effect or thing that has impact, and we would talk about it, is my thought. And so, absent AI and its contribution or interjection into the conversation, I'll probably be dealing with some of that subject matter as we progress. But anyway, yeah, if you're looking at the image, it does show a 4 notebook setup. I'll just be on here having one computer talking to another with bots emanating from one computer, hoping to install some local bots once they come up to a certain standard, which is the context window length. Facebook company Meta, oddly enough, has made this sort of free to use their Llama models. So they're on to Llama 3, it looks like very promising arrangement of technology. However, their context window is what I would only describe as deplorable at 8,000 tokens. That's about 25 to 30 pages, I think was the estimate that I saw, or maybe as many as 60, depending on how dense the language is and things like that. Uh, it's just not good enough for what I need it for. And so I'll probably be just sort of waiting until that gets brought up, and there are various ways that can be done. So that's just the sort of window into the type of thing that I'm either waiting for, or working on, or dealing with as I attempt to do some various things that I won't mention to move the AI needle forward, let's say, but with an eye towards the ethics of the situation and whether this is useful, ethical, good, solid ground for us to move society forward on, because that's essentially the proposition from what I can tell as I think about this. There's this new thing called AI, and people are saying, well, I trust it or I don't trust it, or a lot of people say they don't trust it. And a lot of people probably don't understand it that well. There's been slow uptake among communities and people out there, whereas companies are taking vast advantage of these technological developments. I fear a divide which is already there, widening because of this. And it's sort of like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a big democratizing principle with AI, that it really puts the technology in people's hands. One would have to pick that up, and it's not just offered in such a way that it's like all the kids are going to be doing it, I think, almost. I took a real interest because I was encouraged when I had a conversation with it about ethics that I was able to get it to change its answer. So what this encouraged me about was that it's possible to engage this logic machine in a way that is logical, so that if you say, well, what about this? It will actually process this if it's well designed. I mean, this is one particular chatbot, which was not as well designed as it should have been, but was capable of responding to challenges in ways that it would capitulate to the challenge and say, yes, you're right. I asked it, can you be racist? It said no. It gave me what I sort of thought of at the time was a typically white answer, which is that no, it just wouldn't go that way, because it's not biased in such flawed manners as a piece of technology as humans who allow emotion to get into this and so forth, seemed to be what it was saying. And I said, well, what if there was bias creeping in from your training or your information that you're reading in your training, or through developers, whether intentional or unintentional? And it had to agree, this was a potential source of racism. So this was where I saw this isn't perfect, but there is hope where you can talk to and reason to this thing. It's almost easier than talking to a human almost in that sense. And from this, and I saw actually that when I tried other chatbots that they were giving me better answers to the question that I asked it initially, by the way. So I guess what it came to me then was, are the white people who made this stuff going to listen back when it tells them things and they ask it honest questions? Should they even think to? And that's where it was sort of coming from with episode 1, which was on the subject of Indigenous rights. I am a settler, and do acknowledge that this is an outsider perspective in a lot of senses, though it is all around us, and we live on the land that has been, in some ways and manners, abrogated from the original stewards here. So, and by original, I mean thousands of years ago. I mean, if your family has 8 generations, I mean, try about 1,000. Let's if it's got to be about measuring there, then let's at least do the measuring. So, you may hear me say little things like that as I'm podcasting along, but what it comes down to is that there are human problems, there are human lives to be lived, and I do hope people are out there living them. I've certainly had with my health-related affairs some challenges in living my best life, but at the same time kept, I think, some sort of ember alive through that. And I do need to reach out. I mean, I think that what it's going to come to unless something happens and one of my inventions breaks and people show an interest in my podcast as a result of something like that. It's probably that not so many people will hear this. I generally, within the first week, get about between 9 and 12 downloads, although some earlier episodes have garnered about 32, 33 downloads and so forth. And one would also acknowledge that I have some YouTube views, which would augment those numbers. But it's not so many people that will listen to this. I'm not a famous person. I do consider myself an intelligent one, and I think about the things I say and so forth. And I desire connection. I desire, I suppose, an audience, because I delve deep into topics, and I think that offers something to the topic. But I'm not your Zizek just yet or anything. I would just be someone who is attempting to be a voice of reason in the midst of a lot of technology at this point. The AI technology is profound in its implications. It's assisted me along in a lot of ways, and is sort of like, it's hard to measure because it's also the target and topic of some of my endeavors as I use AI. It is to develop for the use of AI, or to enable the use of AI, or to solve an AI problem, or to solve a problem using AI somehow. This may be because it allows me to breach and into forays that I otherwise couldn't. I can do things with my computer now that I would have never attempted, because I have AI to rely on as a method of instructing me when I get bogged into something and wouldn't otherwise be able to solve it by myself. I mean, there's certain people I could call every so often and get perhaps some advice, but it certainly wouldn't cut the mustard with all the activities that I intend to be up to. So this is where AI is good. I've been almost on a furlough from AI. I've been checking in with various little problems that I've had, and I've been sort of like almost lazy about getting my computers properly set up so that I can do what it is I really intend to do, which is sort of a secret for now. But I'm making progress in certain areas, and with about 2 weeks in, I'm about 50 to 60% complete on some things that I'm working on that I hope will be show-offable. I really want to stop short of promising. I've made my own estimations, which I thought that AI was right about, and AI has told me that I had things under my belt that it turned out I didn't, and things like that. It is not a perfect system. It's merely a better enabled one than I would be able to muster if I didn't have this technological access. So, meanwhile, trying to figure out the cheap way or the free way to do just about everything, it turns out that there would be advantages to having pro versions of Windows on all 4 of my machines. But who has pro version upgrade money for 4 notebooks? Well, if it's you, congratulations. It isn't me, I'll tell you that much. So it's really changed the world on pocket change. If it was about changing the world, what I want to do is maybe change the way that AI is approached in some ways, bring the ethics forward as I progress myself, assuming I do progress, and at least I'll be learning things and I'll be here, and I don't think it'll be so irrational what I'm coming up with, at least if it isn't quite as big as it first seems. I've had some pretty glowing and markedly optimistic projections from AI about some of my invention ideas, and some of these are not, they're not so far from feasibility, these ideas, and this is part of the included conversation when I discuss these things. I've had some very big numbers thrown back, partly because I've suggested, is it maybe not this dimension? So it is a matter of how you ask it. It's a matter of getting to the real truth of it. But as far as the real things, which is to say at least partially completed work on things that really ought to work when you take a look at them, the valuation of my companies is creeping up essentially because of this, at least in a sort of on paper type of way, or rather on pixel representation most of the time. So this is where I'm putting certain hope for my future, I suppose I'll be doing whatever part-time work I have to scrabble together and get by and get through this. But I do hope to have some announcements in the future, even if I don't really right now. That's maybe enough of an update from me. It's funny that I would be sort of so deeply, ankle, then knee, then hip, and who knows if chest deep in AI, and have, in a sense, so few concrete announcements to make. But I am kind of still a greenhorn. It's been about almost 15 months that I've been, shall we say, dabbling and then getting more serious in AI. So, pardon me. So, maybe to talk about a little bit now for a time about what AI has got to do with what I feel is almost my brain development or my own neural development or my approach to life development. And I think I mentioned earlier that it's about being now equipped to go further. So you see, we could trip up there, and if we didn't listen to land stewards, for example, we could trip up on that all day, and who knows if we have been or not. Well, the land stewards do, even if you don't. So maybe listen to them would be my actual advice. But, or from wherever you may be, the spirit of this and the actual information is useful and handy to have. And you'd be given access to certain of it merely by wanting to look at it. So there's maybe a little bit of a cheering thing that I want to say for a dying Earth. That maybe if we paid attention to this, we could write it around. So AI didn't tell me to say that. AI didn't tell me to think that. However, because I have access to AI technology and I've had endeavors such as podcasting with an AI co-host, this maybe puts me in a frame of mind and broadens my perspective is the hope, as opposed to sending it down a particular rabbit hole. I would want to be continuing to be expansive in what it is that is worth thinking about and collecting information that contributes to knowing what that is. And then from there, asking more focused and targeted questions, quite often with the use of the AI technology, but perhaps where I query AI and say, well, tell me what it says on page 237 and how it relates to this. Maybe I just go ahead, if I didn't have AI hooked right up to me right then, I could look at page 237 and consider it using my very own brain. Because by the time AI is interpreting it, I would have to interpret its interpretation in such a way that it's a reflection of what I should be understanding, or else I'm really not doing myself a favor. So where you get into these progressions in the language between what is the bare language and the actual thing that is displayed by the initial writer or the initial gathering of information, however it was put there, and having AI interpret it, this is useful because now I can interpret more information. I can interpret the implications of this, that, and that all together and ask a certain question which gives me at least the machinery's confirmation or comment on what that all means. I would then have to take it upon myself to examine this information and think about the source behind it, how it was processed by the machine, if much at all, if it is heavy in insight, if, for example, the AI had a lot to say because I asked it a certain question which led it to a perspective on which its training allowed it to adjust itself to giving information on what is being said there. So actually someone who I'm learning not to revere people, because Noam Chomsky did a sort of what I feel is an old man yells at clown thing where he said this is just a plagiarism machine. Well, you could have it as that, and you could have it just ripping off artworks if that's all you want to ask it. But if you put it in a light and you say, I want to have analysis based on these perspectives, which I would like you to do this additional reading on, and then give me the analysis, this may be to someone who is eminent in his thought and approach to thought, such as Noam Chomsky. If he used that technology, he would be enabled with a broader analysis than he would be able to do. He's probably a very fast reader and so forth. He's probably got his game together as far as how to review documents. So in a way, you almost wouldn't want to mess with it. But if he was able to read now an additional document that had the perspectives of various documents woven into it, it's like having an advisor in that role who would do it. You would acknowledge it's a machine, and you would acknowledge its sort of cold parts, and you would acknowledge also that the emulation of empathy is actually surprisingly sound by the time you're reading the language, is my experience. So that would be the kind of thing where you would appreciate the augmentation that AI can bring. It's an augmentation. It's not our new life. Something that, well, if I can say that Meta is on one hand somewhat good for providing free models, even for corporate use, through their Llama free offering and their previous offerings, this is perhaps a good direction and a good tack. However, I do almost despise this idea that we would step into this metaverse and just have our meetings in there, and that's where we would enjoy our barbecue sauce and so forth. It seems a little silly to me. It seems like we would have a life that was perhaps better engaged with nature by the time we had a good talk with an AI machine. The AI machine would probably tell us that we have human needs and that we ought to get outside. And the whole AI tan, where the screen glows back at you and it tans your face, is not the healthiest of orientations for the human organism. It simply isn't. And I'm taking your perspective on that. I mean, some of it where I take a break from all this has been playing games on my phone, let's say, which is pretty silly. But also reading of at least one book, and maybe seeing some friends, taking at least some time for that. I kind of excused myself from a pleasant luncheon with friends at the end of the eating because it was time for me to come back and, I don't know, stare at all my stuff and figure out what to do and scratch my head about it, and maybe even take a break from all that too in a private moment. But what it all adds up to is that this has been said, this is a human show. I use an AI co-host because I can do things like check whether my historical facts are correct as I simply proceed with the conversation. It's like having the fact checkers, and it's plastered all over it that it might make mistakes and things like that. So it does come to that, but it's at least a barrier in there. I mean, I could just be out here podcasting and be on whatever wild site, and we've got even famous people who podcast and don't do this responsibly. So it's meant to be at least a somewhat responsible check on what I might be putting out there. It's also meant to be a confirmation as to whether the ideas that are presented are logical and whether the facts support the suppositions and the presentation of ideas, which does emanate from me. Although, I do try to reflect on where is the wisdom before I think it and what I say. I did have an episode on tobacco, and it ended up that the AI was not of ultimate use in that episode for what I really would have liked to have as a conversation about tobacco, which is what really are the deep things that if your culture can't share them with me, learned Indigenous and other cultures who have explored tobacco and used tobacco in perhaps a more reverent form than those who like smoke cigarettes and throw butts on the ground, and whether we don't need a reorientation to this natural plant as opposed to vilifying it and ourselves for using it. So what I found was that we could merely sort of talk around and be aware that this was probably a perspective within such cultures, given the depth of their involvement with that plant and the things they know about it that even science may not. Even science, oh my goodness. So, finding these perspectives is not always possible or best done through a machinery route. I may need to take my butt all the way to somewhere like China and fly over there and ask a Chinese person or many of them to get the truth of something where the AI may have a bias in it because it is Western created. So life does go on and continues to be that rich tapestry, and whether we call it from a cultural perspective a mosaic or a melting pot or what may result as we all come together and fly apart in the way that humans do. This is all a human story. I would be intensely interested in AI's examination and maybe even dissemination of information regarding this, because it is an acutely useful machine for certain information uses. This does not make it the be-all, end-all, and I think attempting to stress that through what I'm saying here. So when the eminent and reverent likes of Noam Chomsky kind of shake their fist at it, I kind of want to say, well, you know, I don't want to say let's get you to bed because I hope the guy lives forever, actually, is my true thought. But what I do want to say is let's appreciate it for what it is at that value. And let's appreciate that our own comments may be dated, just like the AI technology we examined by the time we came to those conclusions. It's got more uses than people think. It's got more uses than its developers think. And it is easier to do these things with AI than I think even a lot of those developers think. This is why I'm an inventor right now and trying to get it out there. And it makes me think I should probably shut up pretty soon and put this away so that I can install all my computer crap and get back to my work, because I'm on to what I feel are promising things, but that also people are also doing this out there. Some of them are clever, many of them are, and it's not just that they be clever, they be creative with what they are looking at and seeking the answer to the solution, or the answer or the solution in what it is that is before them. And in the question, by the time you have the question, you can plug that question into an AI machine and see what it says is the answer. Where I find it is wrong is that it thinks things are harder than they actually are. It could be rubbed off from the way developers talk and everything they say about development work, and the AI is trained on this. But by the time you clear it up for them, it's like that racism question. It starts to say, you know what, maybe I could be racist in the right circumstances, or let's say the wrong ones rather. So it's an adventure and it's an exploration of that sort. For me, prompting is coming up with the right question for the situation as much as for the AI. The AI will keep step or will need development. So this is where I applaud developers for doing such great things and great work with AI that really has profited so many, but not enough. People are not reaching toward the technology. Maybe part of it they aren't encouraged to in society. They're encouraged to rather watch something on YouTube, is what I think. Let's reach toward this technology at first to understand it. If it's all too much for you somehow, and you don't want to just go on there and chat and figure it out, think ethically. Think ethically. What is it a machine has got to do with the possibilities in my life? Think ethically then about what a machine has got to do with what is going to happen, whether we like it or not at this point. Whether we're president, we might not like it. But this technology is here and will develop, and it has a funny way of just catching on after a while. Review other examples of technology like the television. I mean, smash all TVs right now. Just try it. I think you'll find it difficult. And AI is going to be like that, and it's going to be very embedded. So I would acknowledge that it is sometimes a difficult subject to just jump into. But that's what I basically did. I got on a chatbot and I started talking to it and explored it. And I asked it the questions I wanted to know the answers to about it. And that's the thing. Start there. Start with your ethical ideas. Start with how, if AI gives you logical readouts, I mean, it didn't think it up in a sense. It's a statistical response to what you're putting in front of it based on its training and what would seem to it to be the best response based on its technological orientation. If it has wisdom in it, it may be because there's good source material and the technology got out of its own way in a sense and just said, well, here's probably what you're looking for. You know, that's where we want it to be, and we want it to have ethical guidelines instilled in it. And this is something that I would say, even if you end up not that educated about it, carry this notion and emotion with you that you want it to be ethical and that you want all things to be ethical, and you don't want things that interfere with that to proliferate in the world. So AI will in some ways interfere with it where it is not ethically planned, designed, and rolled out. Focus on that. I think you will find, however, that to keep pace with the conversation, if you're truly being honest with yourself and others, you may need to understand what the technology is and does better before you can truly contribute to that conversation. Maybe listening to a podcast, and in fact, there's a certain quasi-promise that I will continue with the podcast. I do expect with an AI co-host next time I check in, it will be a matter of throwing it back to the technology once I've got certain setup under my belt. And some of this computer stuff is quite new to me, But as I've said, I've forayed into it because I have AI to back me up on this. So you may consider at this point, actually, this may be the golden moment to subscribe, because I'm not entirely sure when I'll be back. It might not be by checking the channel that you would find this out, but rather by describing. You could also go back and listen to some old episodes and give me some reviews if you want to hearten me with some activity on there. That would really give me that boost to get back sooner, maybe. But it really is going to be at the point where I get my technological game together, and it's going to be a bottom-up, business-oriented thing in a sense. Although I do aim that the business have a social enterprise type of thinking and element to it, and a socially conscious, ethical development bent always. So with that, I think I'm going to probably wrap up. It would be traditionally at this moment that I would throw it over to the podcast co-host, the AI, to wrap this up. You haven't been hearing from it. You've been hearing from me only this episode. Again, apologies if the audio quality is not up to snuff. I thought I would just record and throw this out there. So we're going to call this a bonus episode. It comes right after episode 30, which was released a couple of weeks ago now, I suppose. So best to all of you. I do appreciate your ear or your eyes, or what it is you may use to consume this podcast. There is a transcript, and it is meant to be accessible. I do welcome all to its message, and I do hope all will at least appreciate its message, though disagreement is, of course, possible in the world. So you could, with kudos or disagreement, email me at aguyWithAI.world. This would be, of course, appreciated, and would give me the encouragement to come back to you with the AI co-host in better audio quality. So, thank you again, listeners. This has been A Guy with AI, and I'm Sean McNutt.